Georgie. How are you, mate? What about that win?
Would you please welcome and thank our first grade side who turned up here today after a great game last night. Thank you, fellas. Thank you so much. It's great respect. And congratulations. It was going to be a long ride home, I tell you, those 2 points. But thank you so much. Thanks for turning up. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, thank you for joining us this morning to celebrate the life of a South Sydney legend, whom Russell Crowe once called one of Australian sport's greatest heroes, John William Sattler, best known to the rugby league world, of course, as Sats. Apologies for my voice. That's from screaming support for you fellas last night. I spoke to people today. I think a lot of us are like that, aren't we? Thank you for that. An incredible victory over the Panthers. I could feel Sats riding you home once again tonight, as he does, as he so often did. I wrote the foreword to John's best-selling autobiography back in 2014, and I said then that Sats was exactly the sort of bloke that you would want alongside you in a battle trench, a pub fight, or a rugby league scrum. He simply had no reverse gear. Going backwards was never an option for John Sattler. He's also the sort of bloke you'd love to have a beer with at the pub, apart from all that. A delightful man. Redfern Oval here was, of course, his footy home. This place is, was, and always will be the Rabbitohs' spiritual home. This is where Sats, of course, led that great march down George Street against Rupert Murdoch and the mob, along with George and with Bobby McCarthy, to get us back into rugby league. So this, again, is, you think of Sats when you're here, don't you? I offer a special welcome to John Sattler's family, to Barb, his wife, and to Scott, many friends, to all the past and present Rabbitoh players who are here, many of them up the back who played second and third grade with Sats when he was playing. He only ever played first grade. To club management and directors who are here, our great sponsors who've come along again, and partners to the councillors as well. Indeed, everybody here is especially welcome. You say the name Johnny Sattler, you think of South Sydney Rugby League Club. He epitomised Souths maybe more than any other player in our 115-year history. He was, after all, named not just one of the players, but the captain of the all-time South Sydney side after 100 years. He joined Souths from the Hunter Valley, born just outside of Maitland in 1942. Sats played 195 games for the Bunnies, all of them in first grade, as I said. He played in 6 grand finals. He captained Souths in 5 of them, winning 4 premierships. He also captained the Kangaroos, and he played for both New South Wales and for Queensland, as you could in those wild and woolly days before State of Origin, when you could play for both. So let's remember the great John Sattler in action. Have a look at the video.
Well, we're hoping it'll be a St George loss and a South Sydney victory today, Frank. South to win.
I think the main thing about it is the team that we had of great fellows, not just me leading them. It was the ability of the players that were around me that used to pull together, and we just had a very happy time together. And rather than me doing anything special apart from just doing my job on the field, I thought that our team, and we're still very great mates.
The game is all over, and South Sydney has won the 1967 Rugby League Premiership, and the Rabbitohs have done it again. South Sydney 13 has defeated Manly Warringah 9.
But the final hooter brings an end to their hopes, and Balmain its first premiership in 22 years. Souths win 23-12 to take their 19th premiership. Souths win 16-10. It's their second successive premiership and their 4th in 5 years.
I always looked at him, yes, as a son, but also looked at him as a fan. I just admired him so much as a guy and the way that he treated people.
Assumption, Smith gets to the 25 before being grounded by Sattler and Pickens.
He drove you all the way. He's an inspiration to everyone he played with, and he was just a winner, and he just wanted to win so hard.
He was someone who just ran down and took it off him and done his best.
Dummying, Sattler sends Scoop through a narrow gap, and he's over.
I remember John Sattler as a great man, a really tough rugby league player, and a great leader. He'd take no prisoners, I say that.
Myself personally, obviously being in the same position, wearing the number 13 jumper, being handed the captaincy at the same age that Johnny Sattler got handed the captaincy as well at 24 years old. So, yeah, I obviously feel like I've got a little bit to live up to there. And
he always made you feel special in his company, whereas you were the person that felt really special being in his company.
Everyone loved him. You know, even if you see players from the opposition after a game, everyone just respected who he was, and he's just a great bloke, a good person. Would have been a great Prime Minister.
Keeping their line intact whilst scoring 3 tries, Souths win 23-12 to take their 19th premiership.
Also, felt sad.
Just wonderful stuff, you know. It was a great win. The boys all played so well, and they were never going to be beaten tonight. And the big fella here, he's just absolutely blown them out of the water. He doesn't look real bright at present with his eye the way it is, but he's played through and he's come through, and we wish him all the best of his teammates.
I felt his loss. Still in my phone had been going. The media started ringing Clyburn. A few people from the club were trying to ring me to let me know about Sats. So a lot actually happened for me in those moments early, and the press were ringing quite a lot, so there's a lot to take in. Initially, later that evening, I guess, for me it was more of a, personally, it was a nice time to reflect on Sats and who he was as a person, but what he stood for as a player and what that meant, not only in my time in the jersey, but for the generation before me and the one before that, and then obviously Sats' generation. I get goosebumps thinking about it now. The commitment that he instilled in the jersey and the passion and the pride are reflected on all those great attributes and great characteristics that lived through Sats. It was a good time of reflection. But sad thing about it, that's life, and it's going to come to us all at some point. So I like to think of the celebration rather than the sadness.
We do draw a lot of inspiration from St John, and especially the team that he played with back then. So
he left a great legacy, not only for what he did in that grand final, playing the majority of the game with a broken jaw.
Yeah, well, it was Sats' fault. I think Sats would admit this himself.
And I think that if you get right into it right from the kick-off, put the pressure on them early. There's no reason why we can't win this game.
I mean, can you imagine the coach of the other side who was Ron Willie, and he was a sort of firebrand coach, and he'd have been staring their props up before the grand final saying, don't let them control the game, otherwise we'll lose the grand final. So they would have been all pumped up and running onto the field, and I think it just happened early on. I was playing on the same side of the ruck as Sats, and we moved up, and Freddie Jones sort of dummied to Bucknell and then turned the ball back the other way. Well, me and Sats sort of moved up and sort of confronted him, but Sats mostly thought, well, I'm up here, I might as well give this bloke a bit of a clip. So he's given him a bit of a slap over the ear and turned around and run back to the position, unbeknownst that Bucknell's after him, and Bucknell was about 6'3" or 4 or 5, a big, tall, lanky bloke, and he's come down on Sats and...
John Sattler has a severely lacerated mouth, which requires 8 stitches and a triple fracture of the jaw.
Well, I think he just personifies what the club stands for in so many ways. Yeah, we talk about being tough and resilient on the field, and he ticked every box there. Maybe the toughest player ever to play the game.
As a player and as a captain, led the club to 4 premierships, but his passion and his love for the club beyond that has been seen over a long period of time, and his presence is definitely felt in the 4 walls inside here at Redfern. And we are a competitive club. We want to win games, we want to win on the field, and we want to win off it. And it's the drive of guys like John, who did that back in the day, and it lives and breathes through everything that we do now. 2014, I just don't know if you could write those scripts.
Sam Burgess brings it back, and already there might be a problem for Sam Burgess.
One of the traders actually ran onto me and said, think of John Sattler, think of John Sattler. I would say he helped me get through that game.
Sats was one of the first guys ever to wear a coat and tie in our era to every game. That was whether you're playing at the cricket ground or you're playing out whoop-whoop. Once he got in that dressing room, he just changed. It was like that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, like once that tie and coat come off, the nails started growing longer and the teeth started protruding out, and he was just wild, and he thought, oh, geez, I'm glad on your side today, And then when the game was over, the suit went back on again, and he'd go and mix and mingle with these old ladies talking about cats and dogs.
He plays to win, and that everybody knows that, and I think that energy and that soul echoes through Redfern and throughout our playing group.
A lot of fathers are heroes. He was my hero, and he'll be sorely missed, but the way that I remember him is just a tear of strength that I know that if ever I called him, doesn't matter what part of the world I was in, he would have done everything possible to be there for me.
And now that we're all round the bar, and the captain's declared it a quorum, we're thinking our way through the night, and we're having the time of our lives. Throw the empties away, start again, for the boys of South Sydney are together, and we'll drink till the dawn breaks again, and may the sessions of South Sydney be forever.
How good is that? Our captain Cam Murray featured there quite a lot in that. Sats was about the same size as Cam, apart from the same number, and like Cam, he used to tackle Mack trucks and get out of it. I first saw him in '64 here against St George, a game we lost, and I loved in his autobiography, he tells the story of having been sent off 18 times. I think that's more than Sam. 18 times. There were different days in those days, but the story I love most of all is, I think Bernie Purcell's son is up here. Bernie was the coach of Souths back in the 60s. And so they were playing out at Wests, and as Sats told the story. And Bernie hung behind there, as coaches did then, to lock up the dressing room as the players ran out, led by Sats. And he came out, having locked up the dressing room, came out to his spot alongside the sideline, and Sats was running off, and he thought he'd forgotten his mouthguard. He said, "What have you forgotten, Sats?" He said, "No, I'm off. I've been set off." A minute into the game, and Sats was set off. But a remarkable bloke, but times were different. Hell of a player. Well, let's bring up the best club CEO in rugby league, in fact, any kind of football, Blake Solly.
Thank you very much, Ray, and thank you for taking the role of MC today. I know you've seen much of South Sydney's success, and you saw a lot of John, so it means a lot to us to have you MC today. Thank you. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. On behalf of our ownership group, Russell, Mike and James, our board led by Chairman Nick Pappas, our members and the entire club, I'm honoured and humbled to be asked to say a few words about John and his immense contribution to the Rabbitohs. Today we mourn the passing of a Rabbitohs and Rugby League legend in John, but also celebrate a life lived to the fullest and a legacy without peer at South Sydney. I want to welcome and pay my respects to the Sattler family led by Barbara and Scott. It's been a privilege to see the tremendous strength in your family over recent weeks, and I want to thank you for giving us and our members and our fans this opportunity to celebrate John here today. I'd also like to welcome the teammates of John and their families in attendance, in particular to George Piggins. I know, George, your return to the club was something that John hoped for, and to see you now as a life member here at training and at games would be something that John would have been tremendously happy about. Welcome to all those teammates. Thank you. Unfortunately, I was too young to see John play live. I often felt like I feel like I did, because I grew up in a household where his name was and the stories of his deeds on and off the field were held sacred. My father and grandfather had one true passion in life, and that was the South Sydney Rabbitohs. And like every fan who saw that golden era when John captained the team, they adored, admired, and at times beatified John. There were few conversations about South in our house that didn't refer to John or didn't finish with a story about what they'd seen John do on the field. And in thinking about John for today's memorial, the words that they used to describe him as a kid came rushing back. On the field, he was uncompromising. He was brave, he was unbreakable, a winner, a leader, a captain. He was courageous, he had physical and mental toughness, and he was tenacious. They're almost the same words that everyone's used about John since his passing weeks ago. Simply, John's one of the greatest leaders the club's ever had. 6 grand finals, captaining the team in 5 of them, and leading the club to 4 premierships. He only ever played first grade at this club, and he captained his country and his state. The 1970 grand final remains rugby league folklore. Much of the story doesn't need to be repeated today. We all know the moments from the game and the way John inspired the team to a premiership. I think it was Russell who probably said it best when he said that even today, any evidence of true courage on the rugby league field is immediately measured on the Sattler scale. In a sport as tough and challenging as rugby league, for the Sattler scale to be the yardstick 50 years on says it all about John's approach to the game, his life and his character. During the half-time, he refused treatment and insisted he continue playing. He said to his teammates, "The next bloke who tries to cut me out of the play is in trouble," leading and inspiring his team to that premiership win. I spoke to Bobby yesterday, his great friend Bobby McCarthy, and asked him what he loved most about John. Some of it's captured up there in the video with the Jekyll and Hyde comment, but he loved the transformation. John in his suit coming to games, John on the field, tough, uncompromising. He wanted to test everyone. He wanted to test the opponents mostly. He wanted to test his teammates, sometimes the referee, and he wanted to test them to get that win. But off it, he would walk across, grab his suit, into the leagues club across the road and talk to the elderly women about their cats and dogs. And that brings me back to the words that my parents and my grandfather used to use about John off the field. He was a gentleman, he was humble, he was generous, he was principled, honest, caring, curious and respect. I've spoken to so many people in recent weeks who have their own story about John off the field. Dr. Jimmy LaHood, who as a child would regularly attend training here at Redfern, watching his heroes go about their preparation for the weekend's game. Jimmy recounts how John would stand at the fence asking him how his schoolwork was going, what subject he liked and how his marks were. Jimmy swears John was more interested in his schooling than Jimmy was. Jimmy also says it wouldn't be without John's interest in his schooling, Jimmy probably wouldn't be a doctor either. He was that passionate about people. Everyone who met John had a similar story. When you were in John's company, he had an innate gift for making you feel that you were special, when really the special person in the conversation was John. There are too many stories about John's compassion and his generosity and his care away from the field to mention. But it's hard to pick one from that treasure trove. But if there was one, it was just before the grand final, 3 weeks before the grand final on 30 August 1970. John was standing at the Janali station talking to one of the members of the club committee when he heard people cry, "Stop the train, stop the train." He looked towards the platform, saw a suitcase perched at the edge and rushed over to see an elderly man trapped down on the tracks, unable to move. Knowing the man must have fainted, John jumped down, grabbed him, threw him back on the platform before a train arrived less than a minute later. Without John's act of bravery, he would have been killed in front of hundreds of Sydney shoppers at the station that day. 2 events, 3 weeks apart, and in some ways defined John. His character, his courage, his care. Why he was such a hero to so many. If anyone epitomises the true spirit of the South Sydney Rabbitohs, it's John. He bled red and green. He would do anything for his teammates. He never took a backward step. He always led from the front. He was loved by everyone connected with the Rabbitohs, whether it was one of his former teammates who he led to premiership glory, or the man in the street who loved South Sydney just as much as he did. He was empathetic off the field, and he truly represented everything that we want the Rabbitohs to be. John's contribution and values are reflected in the work of our players and our staff every day. Everyone at the Rabbitohs wants to honour his legacy and respect the heritage he helped to create. When I look at our team today and their exploits on and off the field, Cameron Murray is a captain of our club at the same age as John was. Campbell Graham playing last year's final series with fractured ribs all the way through 3 games. Players like Cody Walker, Latrell Mitchell, Shaq Mitchell, Ben Lovett, who left their small towns in the bush to come to Sydney to try and make their way in a game as brutal as rugby league and build a career and a family here. Watching our players interact with fans here at Redfern or Maroubra, or the respect they showed Chief of Navy Mark Hammond at training on Wednesday, and finally their tenacity last night, never giving in, playing to win across both teams and securing the winning in the last minutes. They were the values of John's life and career and the values and the culture of our club today. Finally, John's well-known favourite saying was, "I play to win." Everyone knows that. He was on our jersey in round 4, and there is nothing more South Sydney Rabbitohs than that. John always held the Rabbitohs dear to his heart, and everyone here at the Rabbitohs held John dear to theirs. He was one of the greatest ever Rabbitohs, and his legacy and contribution to our club will live on forever. Thank you.
Sunrise on the station breaks the morning spell. Red and green streamers fly inside the Railway View Hotel. Cleveland Street shuffles shining into the mighty roar. We were walking through the twilight the day John Sattler broke his jaw. 11A to a house, postman's his land of plenty, but there was nothing left for people like us in September 1970. Some worked the Everly Railway yards, some worked the tanneries on the Botany shore. We didn't work the Saturday that John Sattler broke his jaw. If it's high enough, if it's long enough, if it's straight between the posts, drink your beer but shed no tears, for these days you miss the most. Every step and sill sat shining in blanket from door to door, and the tears rolled down like rushes the day John Sattler broke his jaw. Drink your beer but shed no tears, for these days you miss the most. Every step and sill sat shining in blanket from door to door, and the tears rolled down like rushes the day John Sattler broke his jaw. And the tears rolled down like rushes the day John Sattler broke his jaw.
There you go. See, Sam, that's in store for you. They're going to write a song about yours one of these days too. Let me endorse what Blake said earlier as well. As a very proud Kamilaroi man, I earlier had written here, I wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my deep respects to all of them and every other Indigenous person here today. All right, we've got some great people here and we're very honoured to have them. We're honoured to have be joined by the National Rugby League CEO, Andrew Abdo. Would you please welcome Andrew?
Good morning. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we gather here today. Pay my respects to elders past and present. On behalf of the Australian Rugby League Commission and Chairman Peter V'landys and everyone in the NRL, it's an honour to pay my respects and to celebrate the contribution of John William Sattler here today. I also pay my respects to the Sattler family, of course particularly to Barbara and Scott, and to all family and friends gathered here today. I also acknowledge the South Sydney Rabbitohs Club, Chairman Nick Pappas, the owners, the directors, CEO Blake Solly, the entire South Sydney family. This is a great club with great traditions. Thank you very much for the opportunity to say a few words today as the rugby league community celebrates the life of a legend. When I arrived in Australia, the first match I attended was between the Rabbitohs and the Bulldogs. It was the traditional Easter Sunday, Friday match. I immediately fell in love with the game, the community, and I felt part of it. I felt part of Australia. I developed a deep admiration for rugby league after witnessing those 80 minutes. Not just for what I saw on the field, but the passion and the community spirit in the stands. The history that was spoken about with so much pride by so many people. Rugby league is a game of tribes and a game of heroes. Inside those tribes are the characters of the game, those that entertain us and those that provide great service to the game. There is no better example of a tribal community than the South Sydney Rabbitohs, and there is no greater example of a hero than John Sattler. I'm not a deeply religious person, but I do believe that we have one life, and I often think about how you would measure the success of your life when time is up. For me, it's three things. Who were your people? Relationships with families and friends. What were your passions? What impact did you have? What dent did you make in the universe? And finally, what was your purpose? And did you follow it with integrity? People, passions, and purpose. Although I never had the honour of meeting John personally or seeing him play live, such was his impact on the game that the many people that I've spoken to have given me a deep sense of his achievements on all three of these measures. He loved his family and his friends, and they loved him. He embodied mateship. His passion for football and the South Sydney Rabbitohs. He was brave and bold when the moment mattered most. And his purpose was clear. He loved playing hard and winning. He had competitive spirit and the will to win. But most of all, he had integrity, loyalty, humility, and compassion off the field. John Sattler, one of the toughest to play the game on the field, but one of the most humble and softly spoken off it. In our 115-year history, there have been over 10,000 rugby league players play at first-class level, but only 46 have played more than 300 games. That's less than 0.5%. John played 346 first-class games. 6 grand finals in the Cardinal at Myrtle. 65, 67, 68, 69, 70 and 71. Just consider that for a moment. 6 grand finals. Only the very best can reach that summit. And John did it all with South Sydney, captaining the team to 4 premierships, 67, 68, 70 and 71. He led a golden era for this club. It's impossible to stand here at Redfern Oval and not be touched by the history of this great club, and John Sattler stands at the gates with the best of them, alongside the greatest to have worn the jersey. Clive Churchill, Bob McCarthy, Harold Horder, and Ron Coote. It's impossible not to stand here and consider the reverence that this grass has, the grandstand, the fans, everyone holds in reverence the contribution that John has made. And when you hear about the history of South Sydney, it's impossible not to understand the significance that John played in that role. One story will live on, as we know, and we've just heard the song of. He played through the 1970 grand final with the jaw broken in 3 places. Now that jaw would go on to be as famous as John himself, as we heard in the song. But as famous as that story is, it will never be the true and whole reflection of John the man. John the player in some sense, but not John the man. He arrived at the club from Kurikuri in 1963 with a reputation, well, how could you put it politely? Let's just say he was a fairly difficult fellow to deal with on the football field. Sure enough, he was sent off 3 times in that first season in the Big Smoke. Now, I'm not sure how much actual game time John would be enjoying under the current judiciary system. But having said that, his elevation to captain in 1967 was a very interesting move. John quickly developed into one of the game's most inspiring leaders, but he also had a level of self-awareness and maturity and ambition. He once famously said, "I had a reputation, having been given a few holidays by the judiciary, and I had the habit of exploding every time something went wrong. That's where the captaincy really helped me. Instead of always acting on impulse, I'd stop and think for a while and take a much calmer approach. It was a responsibility that I grew to enjoy." It's a really interesting observation that he made. And based on that assessment, there might be a few characters playing in the NRL in 2023 who could do with being appointed captain. At the time of John's passing, our chairman, Peter Valandis, observed, "The tales of his toughness were quite extraordinary, but they were also at odds with his nature off the field. He was a true gentleman." That was certainly a view published in an Old Souths article in the mid-1960s, which I read. It said, "Sats is the ideal team man. Off the field, he is the most courteous, has a happy disposition and great manners. It is little wonder, therefore, that he was well liked not only by his teammates, but by the football club in general." Off the field, John was always giving his time to fans and loyal servants of the game. I've been told by those closest to him that in the early stages of his career, he used to give his playing shorts and his socks to the gentleman who worked at the Players' Gate here at Redfern Oval. That was John, selflessly South Sydney. After his first grand final success in 1967, Sattler was selected to tour with the Kangaroos, but he dislocated his elbow, and that cost him the chance of playing in the Test. But he went on to make his Test debut against New Zealand in '69 as captain. Only 6 players in 100 years have captained Australia on their Test debut. He also captained Australia against Great Britain in the second Test of the 1970 Ashes series at the SCG. In 2008, John was inducted into the NRL Hall of Fame and was named in the list of Australia's 100 greatest players. This is where his legacy will forever be recognised in our history. In these grandstands and in others, on this field and on others, the stories of John will continue to be told. His legacy as a gentleman and a giant of the sport will live forever. John, you were loved by people. You lived your life with passion and you defined your purpose. May the wind always be at your back.
Thank you kindly, Andrew. Thank you very much. Andrew, the game against the Bulldogs, did we win that or not? The one you saw? No, of course we did. Of course we did. Thank you. Thanks for your time and thanks for your appearance and your words. All right, let's have another look at the more personal side of John Sattler. This is a family video courtesy of Barb. Have a look.
You remember me when the west wind moves among the fields of barley. You can tell the sun in his jealous of gold. So she took her love for to gaze a while among the fields of barley. In his arms she fell as her hair came down among the fields of gold. Will you stay with me? Will you be my love among the fields of barley? And you can tell the sun in his jealous sky when we walked in fields of gold. I never made promises lightly, and there have been some that I've broken, but I swear in the days still left we'll walk in fields of gold. We'll walk in fields of gold. Of gold, we'll walk in fields of gold. Many years have passed since those summer days among the fields of barley. See the children run as the sun goes down, as you lie in fields of gold. You remember me when the west wind moves among the fields of barley. You can tell the sun in his jealous sky when we walked in fields of gold. When we walked in fields of gold. When we walked in fields of gold.
They're great videos. Andrew, looking at that up there, I should have said the True Believers never mentioned 1969. We don't mention that year at all. A grand final, the one that got away. All right, it's terribly sad to think of John's passing. We're here to celebrate. It was a glorious, incredibly successful and fulfilling life. Helped as always by his family and so many of the good friends who are here today. In what we all know can be sometimes bitchy sport, with a lot of backbiting and criticism of the stars, especially today with social media. I don't think any of us ever heard a single negative word about John Sattler. That's the mark of the man. It's quite incredible. So let's hear now from the man John called probably his greatest success story, his son, Scott Sattler.
Thanks, Ray. I just want to thank everyone, Rugby League fans and South fans, meant so much to Dad. And I think anyone who knew him would tell you how giving he was with his time. We keep hearing the testimonials over the last few months about how special he was to people and how positive he was with the influence that he had on people. This club, its fans, and the ground become like a second family to Dad when he made the trek to South in 1963 as a young man from Kurri. He was taken in by the Rabbitoh faithful, and he was forever grateful for that. We heard so many stories growing up about this great ground as kids, how visiting teams hated coming here. Reggie the Rabbit, who used to live underneath the grandstand. Bernie Purcell, he said, when he used to coach the side before Clive, never drove anywhere, he said, Scott. He said, so he'd just walk off into the darkness. He said, it's all right, he'd get home, someone will pick him up and drop him wherever he needs to go. Clive Churchill, pulling up in his taxi, coaching this star-studded side, and then getting back in his taxi to go and finish his shift. This ground and this club served as the perfect backdrop that took a fiery young bush kid and turned him into a proud leader of this community. In 1996, after hearing so many great stories about this ground, and South had moved over to what is now Allianz Stadium in 1988, I got the opportunity to play here in 1996 versus the Bunnies on a return to Redfern game. Dad attended because he was so excited that I was going to spend some time on this ground he called home. And he said to me straight away, what shed are you in? I said, you go to the end of the tunnel, turn left. He said, that used to be the home shed. Why is it the away shed? And I was informed last night by Darren Brown, former player, that Jack Gibson made that change. He said, well, if you go to the furthest hook on the far left, that was my hook for the entire time I was at the club. So I found the hook, I walked up the tunnel, and I stood at the end of the tunnel in 1996 watching the game before, and a lady was sitting to my right in the grandstand who looked like she'd been supporting the club in the 50s and 60s, and she was knitting. And she looked up at me and she said, what's your name? I said, Scott. And she said, what's your last name? I said, Sattler. And she said, I bet you're not as good as your dad. I said, probably not. Anyway, the game finished. We got beaten by the Bunnies. I wasn't too upset about that whenever we beat South and wherever I was playing. I was walking off and she was still knitting. She was halfway through looked like some sort of baby cardigan. I remember it quite vividly. And she didn't actually look up, but she sensed I was walking off and she yelled out, oi. And I looked down and I said, how are you? She goes, I told you were shit. And that's what's so amazing about the Bunnies fans. That they'd even sledge one of their favourite players' sons, even if he played for an opposing side. That day still stands as one of my proudest days, to be quite honest, that I got to play here and hang my jersey on his hook. I was sitting with Dad 3 years ago. And we spoke about the club. And Redfern Oval. His memory wasn't as vivid in relation to general details, but his recollection of the Rabbitoh days were always clear when he talked about Eric Sims training in bare feet and how fast Michael Cleary was, but they called him Michelle. How great the great Paul Sate was, and Pittard and Bobby Grant and his evil eyes. Ron Coots, nicknamed Solid because he'd walk around the dressing sheds without his shirt on saying, look how solid I am. Bobby McCarthy, how great Bobby was, he said, one of the greatest back rows we'll ever see. And then he went on to everyone, Gary Stevens, the great tackle technique, and Lurch, my great mate Lurch. And there was Elwyn Walters, and of course George Piggins, the godfather of the club. He went on and on about the great Clive Churchill and his love for Bernie Purcell. He loved the 2014 grand final. It was like another coming of Dad to see South Sydney in the grand final. And for him to be able to attend that grand final alongside George, who hadn't been back to a game for many years, was a proud day for Dad. He loved the Burgess boys, all four of them. He said the great Yorkshire manners that they have is what South Sydney represents and how you should respect everyone. He loved Michael Maguire and the success that both he and his coaching staff brought back to the club. He would have loved Jason Demetrio and his personality, and personally knowing JD, I just know he would have loved Dad, and Dad would have loved him if he got to spend more time with him as well. Great personalities of the club, and that's what he was proud about, that they were always there for the community and the people. And I was sitting with him there 3 years ago and we spoke about Redfern Oval. And as I said, he wasn't that vivid with a lot of his general details, but with South Sydney, he could talk for hours, and that's what I miss. His memories were really ingrained when it came to anything to do with this club and its great memories. He said to me, "Can you remember we spoke years ago that one day whenever we go, we'd like your ashes spread?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I'd love to have some of my ashes spread on Redfern one day if they would let me." Well, they've let you, Dad, and that's why we're here today, to ensure that you always stay part of this ground. Thank you for the club, everyone, from Nick Pappas, Blake, the playing group, the coaching staff, all the officials as well, and all the departments. Shannon Donato, thank you very much for your communication throughout the last month, and most notably the community and the fans, all rugby league fans, but mostly South Sydney fans that played a huge part in my dad's life. I just want to say, celebrating his life over the last month has been hard and difficult, but it's also been really exciting about the positive reflection that he's had on everyone that he always came in contact with. And if I could leave you with this, he always thought about others before himself, and it looks as though that he continued with that in his passing. He loved this club so much that he coincidentally passed away in 2023, the Chinese year of the rabbit. Maybe bigger things that are come in October. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Scotty, very much indeed. I think you probably would have liked that, don't you? You mentioned the scattering the ashes. What, you're going to keep some for the new home? Tell us.
Yeah, Mark Ellison, great South Sydney player and a very good friend of the family. He mentioned it a few weeks ago, and I only thought about it a few days ago. I remembered that he asked me, and I thought that he might have been apprehensive about asking again because of how emotional the situation is. But he mentioned that could we keep some of the ashes for the new facility, which I think we'd love nothing more than that as a family, to be able to keep some here. This is a spiritual home here, and obviously we'd like to spread some here that remain part of history and the future as well. But I think it's only fitting that we have a place over there as well.
Right. And again, I guess I can't imagine these players showing more respect and turning up today after a brutal game last night. You'd like them to be part of the spreading the ashes if
Absolutely,
the boys will join you?
Yep.
Please, Charles.
Yeah, absolutely. Love if the boys, and I think if the staff here are going to guide the boys over to near the goalposts here. And I think it's also fitting that if I could ask Bob and Ron and also George if they all three could come down. They knew Dad longer than me.
This will be a highly emotional ceremony we're going to have here. Of the current South Sydney team, joining Scott and three of our greatest legends across near the goalpost, and we'll scatter some of those precious ashes.
and the captains declare their victory. We're drinking our way through the night. 3 cheers for the all rubbers for the victory we have won. Go, dear boys, till we are together. Every now and then we have a win. We will play them all around on their home organic ground. If they'll only play a fair and honest game. Hey, hey.
Yes, again, a round of applause for our first grade side who picked up their weary bodies to come here today. Fantastic, guys.
Well, he was a bit crazy and he was a bit wild. I think it was a combination of both of them. Off the field, a different bloke when he came off the field. I think he tested everyone who was out there, but when he came off the field, he was a true gentleman. But on the field, he was a great leader for us. I mean, you've only got to look at his record and our record when he was the captain. We achieved a lot of successes, and it's sad that this has happened today. But things move on, and it's just sad. But as we say, Satch was great to us. He's a great captain, great leader.
The legacy he leaves behind, what impact does he have on the club and the inspiration he has for the players as well?
Well, you can see with the Sam Burgess thing where he broke his cheekbone and the word came out, Sattler, so stay on and just play through the hardships, and Sam was able to do that and also get us another premiership. So the Sattler legacy is going to be here forever and a day, well past our day. We've got much to go, as you can tell by us. But Sats is going to be a great legacy. He's left a great legacy for this club.
And the love he had for you guys and his teammates, that was above all else.
Well, it was. I mean, he looked after us on the field too. Many a time he's ran past and said, "I'll just give that bloke a clip for you." And he said, "What for?" And he said, "He whacked you back there a couple of rucks ago, you know." And it was like that. He just was a father figure to us. He's a lot older than us. Not a lot older, but he's 2 years older than all of us. And he just thought he was the father figure, and he was the captain, and he just looked after his little flock.
And he was great at it. You know, if he seems he didn't let anyone get too knocked about, and he'd go in and try to sort them out when it did happen. You know, when it did happen, and he was there, he'd always give us and we'd always, and if you weren't tackling or anything, he'd tell you, "Hey, come in here and do a few tackles," and stuff like that. So he never missed you, you know, both ways. He was a great man. Can't tell you how can't speak highly enough of the great things he'd done in playing rugby league.
And sort of, what's your greatest memory with him? The memory he sort of leaves with you?
Well, his greatest memory is probably the 70 grand final, and when he, you know, that was just a great event. So So yeah, I mean I got many great memories about him, and you know all the things he done on the field. You know, I mean, which you don't want to hear about, but he was a great player. That's all I can say.
How would he like this today?
Oh yeah, he'd like to function like this. I think this is a great send-off for him, and he certainly deserves it. You know, because of the player he was and the effort he used to put into South Sydney, and I think a lot of this is to do with him, how he's done it. You know, that's he was a great man, and he deserves everything that he gets.
It's reflected in the fans, and you know, it's close to everybody's heart.
Sure. Yeah. Everyone you speak to, you know, not only South fans, but fans through the game who followed him through his career and what he'd done and the things that he'd done off the field too. And, you know, I mean, I've seen him, you know, with kids and that. He was great with little kids come along and he'd sign their autographs and try to help them and do whatever he could. You know, he was a great man. But you get him on the field here and he was quite brutal at times. That's the best word, I suppose. Is that a good word?
How would he have gone playing today's game?
Oh, you wouldn't pick him. He was one bloke you wouldn't pick.
He'd get 6 weeks the first week and then 12 weeks the next week. And then
you'd see him in 3 years' time. It's time to go away and go overseas to Italy for a couple of years.
And what about Redfern Oval then as the place to spread the ashes? Is that pretty special?
Oh, fantastic.
You'd love that.
Especially for us, the memories that we've got here with John Sattler and South Sydney. It's something really special. I mean, we were sort of in our sort of 18s when we started playing here, and you're still growing up, I suppose, you know, and that memory sticks with you forever. But we had a wonderful career here, and it was this ground that sort of helped it, you know. And the people here, you know, the 20-odd thousand people who flood into it on the weekend. I don't know what that is, but sorry.
Brilliant.
Thanks
boys.
Thank
Okay.
you so
Thanks.
much.
Three legends.
Well, I think most people involved at South Sydney have got a connection with John and certainly his family, but I came here in 2009 and obviously with the history through to 2014 with the grand final, and then just became close with John at a number of events over sort of those 10 or 12 years, and he saw him a lot of different things, so we became close friends with him, especially with the history and the moment we shared in 2014 after the grand final. But he also presented me with my 150th jersey up in the Gold Coast, which is really cool, and met a lot of his family then, his granddaughters and everything. So it's we've always had a great relationship, obviously with Scott as well, and the rest of the family, and Barb's too. So it's like I said, it's probably a great day of celebration and reflection, and a lot of those times and days spent together.
In that 2014 grand final, when the trainer came out and said, John Sattler,
Yeah.
did it actually make an impact on you?
It did actually, yeah. I mean, because obviously the history you can't really escape. Being a South Sydney player, it's everywhere. For those of you that have been underneath it at Redfern, history is littered everywhere. There's a picture of John Sattler. He's saying, "I play to win." Everyone knows that. So it did give me a bit of a, well, I can't really leave the field because Sats didn't either. So it did help. We still had to get the job done, but it did help for those first few moments.
In terms of the mark he leaves behind, if you had to sum up the inspiration and memory that he leaves with you, what is that?
Oh, I think just not necessarily just as a player. I think what he stood for as a human being, as a man, as a leader, as a father, a friend. He just was a great man, a great role model. I think it's a good icon for today's players. I mean, Cameron epitomises that at the club. He's our captain. He's a great role model. He's intelligent. He's kind. He competes as an athlete, but away from the game, he's a good man, and I think that's one of John's greatest legacies here at the club.
Cameron, for you, I mean, you share so much, the captain's at the same age, you both play the same position. Did you go on a journey to learn a bit more about Johnny Sattler when you became captain, or tell us about your relationship with him?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say my relationship with Sats was probably as personal as someone like Sam's, but like Sam said, everyone that plays at this club has a connection to him and his family because of the legacy that he left behind and what he epitomised and what he stood for. So everyone knows about Sats, and obviously someone like me growing up in the area supporting the club, I knew about Sats from a young age, even though he was a few generations before me. So yeah, and even in the last couple of weeks, obviously being relevant, read a little bit more about him and understood a little bit more about him as well. So yeah, it was a really special day today. It was really special in round 4. We wore that jersey with half the rabbit, and to be able to win in the fashion that we did was pretty special. So yeah, I'm glad that we were able to sort of send him off the way we did today.
Last night, did it come up last night, anything about John Sattler?
Not in words, but I'm sure he was there in spirit, you know. We played that sort of gritty football and that grinding football that, you know, John Sattler, you know, played with, and it was a special night for the club. And yeah, I guess when the memory of Sats is in the air, I guess, and then we step up to the plate, and we did that against Manly in round 4, and we did it last night. So yeah, we get a special opportunity every week to run out and represent people like John Sattler when, you know, when we're representing the club here, but we also get an opportunity to create our own legacy and put our, you know, our stamp on the club and the legacy that we want to leave behind as well. So we're in a really privileged and special position to be able to represent such a rich history, but also be in a position to be able to create our own. So yeah, we're moving in the right direction, and yeah, really keen to see where we can go.
As a leader, what can you lean on about his leadership to inspire you, or what will you take from his leadership moving forward?
I think Sam put into, you know, in great words before about how good of a leader he was on and off the field, and it wasn't just what he did on the footy field, but what he did off it and what he stood for, and the person that he was. You know, I know John Sattler through stories, through other people, and I hear just as many stories of how good a bloke he was off the field than I do about how tough a man he was on it. So yeah, he represents and epitomises what it means to be a South Sydney man on and off the field. So yeah, his spirit and legacy definitely lives on, because that's the type of people and players that we want to be here at the club. So yeah, it'll definitely live on forever.
Thanks, boys.
Thanks, boys. Thank you. Well, take us through that, mate. Was it a pretty special sort of memorial for the club?
Yeah, it was. It's really special. You know, this place meant a lot to him. You know, he signed a contract in 1963 on New Year's Day, and he only ever signed a 2-year contract because he never wanted to move to Sydney. So he drove back and forth 3 days a week, a 6-hour round trip to Curry to Sydney for training for a year. And he always thought, I don't think I'll end up in Sydney, but this place just meant so much to him, Redfern Oval and the Redfern community and the fans. And so, you know, when we had that discussion 3 years ago, he reminded me of the conversation we'd had many years ago, that he'd always want to end up here one day in some capacity. So today was really fitting, you know, and on the back of last night as well was pretty special. So, you know, this club is a great club, and the way that these players handle themselves today and the respect they have for the fans and the community is the way that he treated the fans. And so he would have been really happy with how today played out.
You didn't see that old lady in the crowd anywhere, did you?
Yeah, no, it's yeah. There's so many great memories. You know, he's when I told him that we were going to play here in 1996, he was like a kid in a toy shop. He couldn't believe that I was going to get the chance to play here. And as I said during my speech, still today it's a really special moment. It's really close to my heart to be able to share just a very, very small period of my career on the same field that he called his second home.
Can you believe the impact in the fans that turn up time after time?
Yeah, I can believe it, because this, you know, South Sydney club are great really great at celebrating their history. You know, could we imagine what it'd be like without a South Sydney in the competition, you know, so many years ago, and if that was still the same today? So, you know, the power of people in sport and rugby league. So it doesn't surprise me at all. And you know, this club has had so many great legends over the years, and there's going to be a few more that we're going to be celebrating in years to come. So, you know, the fans, the South Sydney fans, doesn't matter where you walk, what street you walk on, what city, what town, whatever it may be, there's always a random South person that always wants to talk about those glory years. And, you know, this place was very, very, very dear to him. And the friends that he still got from this place, you know, Cootie and George and Macca and Koa, you know, guys are very close to him. And, yeah, this place is pretty special.
A lot of people remember your dad's legacy on field but also off field. What do you believe he leaves behind? What is his greatest legacy for you?
He always said to me as a father, make sure you can talk to the bricklayer and the barrister. He said, doesn't matter who you bump into on the street, you don't know their story. So I want you to always show them great respect because you don't know where they've come from and where they're going to go. And that's the way that he treated people. He had great empathy. He was gracious towards everyone that came across him until you crossed him. And then even when you crossed him, he always found a place in his heart that he let you back in. So, you know, the legacy that he leaves off the field is the way that he made everyone feel like they're the most important person in the room, from being a rugby league fan to an opposition player off the field after the game, and to, you know, the patrons that attended his many pubs over so many decades as well, and to the person in the street that always wanted to try and get a bit of his time. So he was always giving with his time. His greatest strength was always his greatest weakness as well, because he gave so much time to other people, which forego time with his family. But as kids, we actually got to sit back and watch how to explain what empathy is all about and how to be really kind to people. So I think that's the greatest legacy he leaves.
And this isn't the final farewell, obviously. Curry's next, you were saying?
Yeah, he's had more farewells than the Queen. So, but in saying that, Curry was, you know, a little country town that he's born in Talara but moved to Curry as a young kid and didn't start playing rugby league until he was 16. It was only by coincidence and surprise that he ended up playing rugby league. And Curry is always a small country town that's also been able to born some great internationals as well over the years. So some of his ashes also are going to be put next to his mum and dad at Curry, which, you know, the Curry community, like the Rabbitoh community, want to pay their respects as well.
And getting your dad to sing the team song on SEN Radio, that was a special moment.
It was. That was leading into the 2021 grand final. And I think I broke radio rules that day because I didn't tell him he was being interviewed. And I just said to him leading into the grand final, you know that song you used to always sing when you walked around the house, Dad? Because he had a beautiful singing voice. And whenever my sister and I, we used to try and find him in the house or in the pubs we lived in, we'd just have to follow his voice singing in the keg room. And he was always singing the South Sydney song. And I said, can you remember that song? He said, yeah, I can. I said, can you sing us a few bars? And he sang it verbatim from start to finish. And to hear those words now and the way that he sung it and played last night at Accor Stadium after that win as well, it's become quite haunting now. And it's something I've got on my desktop computer at home, and now and again when I just need to sort of relax a little bit, I listen to it now and then over the last month or so. So I'm so glad that we're able to get that and hold on to it.
Thanks. Thank you, mate.
Thanks, mate. We appreciate it. All the best with Curry, mate.
Yeah, thanks, mate.
You too.
Thanks, guys. Thanks very much, guys. Thank you.